Children of light, another year has come and brings us closer to that which we have worked, dreamed about through the ages. The golden age of perfection when humans will be able to live side by side and love and trust one another. Personally, I'm almost impatient to see this great time come upon earth. I know that which we call God needs to do a lot of vacuuming and house cleaning. But I know that we don't mind that. Do we? For the outcome will be wonderful. I long to see this great time of peace and harmony upon the earth. But let us not be fooled with a false peace. It must come from the center of our own beings and not from outside. Do not fall for an imaginary peace that will come from the earth, but for a short time and then fade out. But we must be the peacemakers, the creators of this age to come upon us. Tonight I ask Mr. Mueller if he would mind if I read from one chapter from his book. And he said he didn't mind sitting here and listening. Because, you see, the reason I've invited him here is because he is a dynamic person that believes in the positivity, and his life has proved it. And this chapter I'm going to read proves the power of his mind and how he has come through and why he does have a position in the UN, and which I will introduce him later. On the phone, he said he is a make-believe. And I said, wow, he's one that makes belief come into action. And that's the kind we want. That's the kind we want to be. We want to imagine and make it come to pass. And we all here imagine a great, wonderful new age. And you can all make it all good back there. That's fine. Make it into the new age. And I told him over the phone, there's such a lot of despair in the colleges. The young people are almost giving up and saying, what is the use? Because the nuclear come will only be gun fodder or nuclear fodder. And they kind of give up. They feel that, what's the use if there's no hope? But I say there is hope. And we need to hear people like this gentleman sitting next to me who can really inspire us to go forward in the midst of all the troubles. You understand why it's a great honor to have him. But I'm going to read from this wonderful chapter. And it is, some of you have heard it and some of you haven't. Most of you haven't. And it's a thrill. It's from his book. The book is called The Recipe for Happiness. And I believe he said, he was kind enough to say he would leave some copies here and that he would give us at a lower rate than if you go to Weiser's and the stores that sell it. I don't know why this is. It because you see, we've been on a kind of a course recently of a dynamic course, you know. We can make it, we can make it, we are perfect, you understand. And this is just a follow-up that I thought a perfect way to start the new year is to be positive. So let me read this. Sit back and relax, Mr. Mueller, and the rest of us don't sit back, but do some of these. They mean a lot to us up here. They mean that you're awake back there, you understand, and that you're getting something. And you didn't pay your 75 cents on the subway for nothing. You understand? Hey, right back there, good. That's what we want, some real alive people. Here, let's go. Let's make one ohm and then start. It says, thank you, Mr. Cooey. Every morning and evening, look at yourself in the mirror and repeat several times, I feel wonderful. Let's say it now.
I feel wonderful.
Do you?
Yes.
I feel wonderful. Oh, come on.
I feel wonderful.
I'm going to look around and see. Go on.
I feel wonderful.
on.
I feel wonderful. I feel wonderful.
Oh,
I feel wonderful.
I don't believe it.
I feel wonderful.
Do you? All right. With that, we'll go on. I feel better than yesterday. What was wrong with yesterday? You all felt rotten? I have never felt so good. It's marvelous to be alive.
It's marvelous to be alive.
And so healthy.
So healthy.
Pretty good. Pretty good. Now, these are the words of our friend here. I remember the first time he came, Jyoti put this in my hand, and I was thrilled with it. And so I called up this gentleman, and it didn't have any of this data on it. It was on a piece of paper. So I said, is Mr. Mueller there, right? I didn't know it was calling the UN. I said, is Mr. Mueller there? And I said, would you like to come and talk to our class, right? I mispronounced every word. I shall never forget his face when some of the French words got mispronounced. He looked out of the corner of his eye over at me like this. I don't know whether you knew it, but some of those, I'm leaving those words out today on your behalf. He looked over and he said, is it possible in this world there can be such a dummy? I'm leaving all those hard words out tonight. First, I'm going to read who he is. This is very informal, as you have gathered, Mr. Mueller. Robert Mueller comes from a small town in Alsace-Lorraine on the border of France and Germany. His grandfather was obliged to change nationality several times because of the wars between the two countries. During World War II, while Robert Mueller joined the French Marquis, several of his relatives had to serve in the German army. It was the suffering and the waste which he saw and experienced at this time which made him decide to pursue a career in international public service, to which end he equipped himself with a doctorate in law at Strasbourg and degrees in economics at Heidelberg and Columbia. He came to the UN in 1948 as an intern and rose through the ranks to director of the Secretary General's office, and he now is Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and also Secretary of Economics and Social Council. It was in 1948 also that he met a fellow intern from Chile, Margarita Gallo, who later became his wife and at present is the president of the United Nations Women's Guild. Mr. Mueller is a well-known speaker and writer on world affairs, a linguist, a humanist, and a lover of cultural diversity. He is a strong popular advocate of international cooperation and an unwavering supporter of the United Nations. And now you know who he is. We are going to read from his book. When I studied at the University of Heidelberg during the war, I lodged in a boarding house. Students from several occupied countries resided there together with Germans who were allowed to study because they had been wounded or because they were needed as doctors and technicians in Hitler's army. In a room next to mine, on the top floor of the building, lived a Yugoslav named Laszlo. He was tall, soft-spoken, aristocratic young man endowed with the finest features. Despite his youth, he was 27 years of age. He had been a colonel in the Yugoslav army. Released from German prison camp, he had come to Heidelberg to study law. His intelligent face carried a dreamy and superior quality, intermingled with considerable strength drawn from his hawk-like nose. His complexion was very pale, almost transparent, and his light gray eyes gave him, at times, a rather distant appearance. Got the picture? We were great friends and became very fond of each other. We were both dreamers and full of expectations about life. I liked his distinguished, calm outlook and intelligence, and he my animal-like passion for life and my carefree wild behavior and laughter. We spent innumerable hours together, either in his room or in mine, discussing life, death, and the future of the world. During the winter of 1942, I wanted to invite him to our home in Lorraine for Christmas, but I knew my parents, who were living in a rather secluded fashion, would not endorse my invitation, so I abandoned the idea and went home alone. When I returned to Heidelberg in early January, our landlady greeted me with the sad news. Your poor friend is severely ill. A few days ago, I found him lying on the floor of his room, unconscious with blood spilling from his mouth. I called a doctor and an ambulance and took him to the hospital. They feared the worst for him, and apparently he is suffering from a very advanced case of tuberculosis. Remember, this is quite a 1942. I rushed to the hospital where I found my dear friend lying propped in a bed, leaning against a pile of white cushions. He was thinner and paler than ever. The skin of his face was moist, sickly, yellow like wax. His long, thin hands were lifeless and almost transparent. He was breathing softly and carefully, as if not to unduly tax his poor lungs. In the midst of this image of desolation, his eyes were glowing with happiness when he saw me. His attitude of calm superiority had not abandoned him. He tried to reassure me about his condition, while in my mind I could not help visualizing the ravages that reigned in his narrow, concave chest. I was allowed to stay with him for an hour or so. Then I took leave and he asked me for a favor. That's a very important favor, kids. Could you please go to the university library and borrow from me any books you can find written by a certain Dr. Coué or by his disciples? Bring them as soon as possible. I went there in the following morning and found indeed a book by Dr. Emile Coué entitled Self-Mastery Through Conscious Auto-Suggestion. I thus learned that then there was another book by one of his disciples, and I thus learned that a doctor from my neighboring town of Nancy in Lorraine had gained world fame for his healing methods. In the 1920s, he attracted enormous audiences in England and the United States, where he produced many miraculous cures with his psychological method. His disciple, whose name I have forgotten, had broadened Dr. Coué's views into philosophy in which self-confidence, say it, good health, and happiness were the cornerstones of life. I absorbed the contents of these two books in a few hours before bringing them to my friend. And this is what he read. Every morning and evening, look at yourself in the mirror and repeat several times with conviction. What are you going to do? Every morning and evening before you go to bed, you're going to look in the mirror with conviction. No matter what you see. I knew a girl that looked in, and she used to look at these blackheads that people get. And the mirror talked back at her and said, look and you'll find. You understand that? As long as she looked for them, she'll find them. You got that? When you stop looking at them and see the perfection, you won't find the wrong. And there was somebody in Ceylon that I told you put germs under one plate and germs under the other plate, the same amount of bacteria. And on this one, he kept saying, you're dying, you're dying, you're no good, you're dying, you're nothing, you're dying to the bacteria. And when they examined it later, they found this had died away and this was the same. And he was asked to go over to Europe and give lectures on the subject. So it works. You understand? It works. Proof. All right. As I said today when I showed my family what had happened to my TV and the light coming, I said, look, proof of it. The blooming TV's busted. Proof of the pudding's in the eating, huh? Well, let's see what we've got here. Here we go again. Every morning and evening, look at yourself in the mirror How many will look at themselves in the morning? Well, if you don't, you'll brush your teeth wrong. How many will look at them in the evening? Now you've made a vow. Don't break it. And repeat several times with conviction. Every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. Here we go. Every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. Every way and every day, I'm getting better and better. Every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. Every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. Of course, if there's any perfect people here, then you don't need to say it. I feel wonderful.
I feel wonderful.
I feel happier than yesterday.
Happier than yesterday.
I have never felt so good. It is marvelous to be alive.
It's marvelous to be alive.
It is marvelous to be healthy.
It's marvelous to be healthy.
All right. The remainder of the two books were merely elaborations of the central theme. I thought at first that it was a little too easy to seek happiness by just repeating to oneself that one felt happy. It's a big surprise, kids. Try it. There was no depth in such a philosophy, but after reflection, I agreed that man had indeed the choice of seeing everything in light or dark, that man has, and women. And that it was not unwise to start the day with the conviction that one felt good, healthy, and happiness to be alive. The amount and intensity of happiness, one's zest for life, one's attitude toward the surrounding world are perhaps determined, after all, by a basic internal decision taken at the beginning of the day. I brought the books to my friend who, to the great surprise of the doctors, recovered within a few weeks and was released from the hospital. Well, Dr. Mueller, we have so many people here. That's good. Fine. I have never forgotten my friend Laszlo and Dr. Cooey's method. True enough, as with prayers, I have not always repeated the suggestion daily, but I have instinctively followed Cooey's philosophy of optimism and self-reliance all my life. Many times at the United Nations, when bad news tends to drag me down, I revert to an innermost part of myself, switch on optimism and confidence, and immediately I return to a positive, creative mood. This mysterious quantum change between a negative and a positive current in the total functioning of the human being is the great lesson I have learned from Dr. Cooey and Laszlo. It is a mystery to me. I do not understand. We don't understand how the healings take place here. I have no idea. But it has done miracles for me, and it certainly saved my life on at least one, if not on several occasions during the war, as the following story will illustrate. Now, it's a very short story, but it is potent and it's full of vim, vigor, and wonder. It says, after a series of adventures and arrests by the Gestapo, I was finally able to cross the border between Germany and France in the summer of 1943. Now, use your imagination. Go back to 1943. Some of you might have been in another life. But go back and visualize. Use your imagination and be interested in this wonderful story that I'm going to relate to you. And then I'll turn the evening over to Mr. Mueller. I was working under the false identity of Louis. Now, I will ask you how you say your name. Harazov. Fine. Is that near enough?
That's fine.
Fine. Louis, he was under a false name of Louis Parazot in a French telecommunications center located in Vichy. In that center, radio messages were recorded which provided the French government with intelligence, information, and political news from the rest of the world. You got that picture? In other words, underground. It was an ideal situation to infiltrate the members of the resistance. Several draft evaders from Alsace-Lorraine had found refuge and a job in it. I got an administrative position which enabled me to warn my friends in the technical center located in the woods outside the city. Isn't this exciting? See, this is better than any TV, isn't it? Of impending inspections by the Germans. Can't you see they're out there in the woods doing their thing, and he's able to tell them in the position he has what's happening to warn them. Their visits had to receive the prior consent of the French authorities and was able to obtain complete information. I had been working there for a few months when one evening in my hotel, I noticed that someone had gone through my possessions. It was almost imperceptible, but I had the feeling that there was something wrong, and I asked the hotel keeper if anyone had entered my room. Yes, 2 workers from the electrical company checked it. I could not know whether it had been a routine inspection by the French police or if the Germans were on my trail, or if electrical workers had indeed displaced some of my belongings. The following morning, I was sitting in my office when I received a telephone call from the guard at the entrance of the building. Like most French governmental services in Vichy, ours was located in a former hotel on behalf of a friend named Jacques. I asked him to have them wait for a while and then let them come to my office on the 2nd floor. My heart had jumped violently when I heard the name of Jacques, for the news had just reached me that this good school friend of mine from my hometown in Lorraine had been arrested by the Germans during a raid on the University of Strasbourg. The men who were on their way to my office were possibly Germans. I told my secretary to receive them, to find out what they wanted, to let me know by telephoning a secretary of a colleague in a nearby office where I took refuge. You get the picture? He goes out of his office, tells her to be calm, and he goes to another one where she can contact him. After a while, the telephone rang, and I heard my secretary say to the other girl, "I am looking for Mr. Parazzo. Do you know where he is? 3 gentlemen from the police want to see him." This message was clear enough. When the phone hung up, I heard loud shouting. A man with a heavy German accent was screaming at my secretary, "If you do not tell me where Parazzo is, I shall have you shot." To gain time for thought, I decided to proceed to the hotel's attic. And I asked the secretary who had harbored me to give a message to one of my colleagues who was a member of the resistance. Is this exciting? Sure is. He joined me soon hereafter and gave me the following report. You have a little chance of escape, if any. There are 5 or 6 Gestapos in the building. They are systematically searching offices and appear quite relaxed, for they know that you are here and the entrance to the hotel is blocked and a prison van is stationed at the curb. To hide here in the attics or climb on the roof will not help. You know perfectly well that they will shoot you down like a pigeon. He left me after these cheerful words. How do you like that? Promising to return if there was any new developments, and I found myself alone to consider the trap I was in. And he said, "This is the moment of all moments," I thought to myself, "to keep cool and in full command of my mental and physical capabilities." I suddenly remembered Dr. Cooey. I must feel relaxed and even elated about the situation. See, I'm reading this because the time's going to come on this earth when economics go bad and that so-called Antichrist will come, and you're going to have to keep yourself cool and comfortable, and you're going to have to think like this gentleman here thought during that time of Hitler. Do you understand this? Now, you're going to remember this story at that time. You understand what I'm doing this for? Okay. I must feel relaxed and even elated about this situation, he says. Following the good Dr. Cooey's advice, I've repeated to myself that it was indeed an extraordinary and thrilling adventure for a 20-year-old youth to be trapped in a hotel, pursued by the Nazis. Would it not be exciting if I could play a trick on them and slip through their fingers? I remember going on a very important thing with a group. It was a very heavy thing we had to do upstairs when we went in this building, and we're just walking, and I said, "Stop." I just read this. I said, this is our opportunity. I remembered Mr. Mueller. I said, this is a great moment in our life. This is our opportunity. When things are hard, you stop for a moment and remember this. That's when you say, this is my opportunity to prove God. Do you follow this? Good. And he said, would it not be exciting if I could play a trick on them and slip through his fingers? You want to hear how he did it? All right. Having thus switched my perspective to a positive, confident frame of mind, I felt relaxed, even happy and cheerful, without any fear or thought of failure whatever. Pretty good, huh? I say pretty good. I began to think calmly and decisively. My sequence of thoughts was as follows. Nothing is hopeless in this world. Would you say that?
Nothing is hopeless in this world.
Again.
Nothing is hopeless in this world.
One more time.
Nothing is hopeless in this world.
Wonderful. I'm diverting right here. You can leave that on. Bruce was to sing, is making it a record. And we had just done firewalking. And so he called up on the phone and he said, I lost my voice. Now he's going to do a record. He's just about ready to make a record. He's down in Little Rock. And I said, what? I said, we've just done firewalking here. What are you talking about? You can't talk. He said in a loud voice, far out. And I said, go to the piano and sing. And he sang beautifully, see? All in the mind. I'm repeating some of this glorious stuff. Having thus switched my perspective to a positive, confident frame of mind, I felt relaxed, even happy and cheerful, without any fear or thought of failure. I began to think calmly and decisively. My sequence of thoughts was as follows. Nothing is hopeless in the world. There must be at least one chance in 1,000 to escape from this situation. I must find that one chance, and for that I must concentrate on the mentality of the Nazis. They know that I am in the building. They are several. They have guarded the entrance. They are convinced that they will get me, and that it is only a matter of time and thoroughness. There is no classical means of escape. I must think of something that would be foreign to their psychology. Interesting? Yeah. I let my thoughts wander in this direction and examined various options, of which all but one led to certain arrest and possible death. A little flicker of hope arose in the following suggestion. There are many people in the hotel. My best chance of escape is to become part of the crowd. Why not walk downstairs and go straight to the group of people who must be gathered on my floor? The Nazis certainly do not expect me to do that. The worst that could happen would be to be arrested, but this is likely to happen anyway. If I have a chance at all, is by doing the one thing the Germans do not expect me to do, to walk straight through them. I put my plan immediately into action. I changed he's up there in the attic in the maid's room, remember? I changed my physical appearance as best I could, wetting my hair with water from a faucet in one of the former maid's rooms, then parting it on the side. I took off my glasses and lit a cigarette to gain a relaxed posture. And once on the 4th floor, I seized a file from a desk and placed it under my arm. On the 3rd floor, I caught a glimpse of 2 Germans who were inspecting offices, but there was no disquietude. It seemed that few people knew what was going on. But it was a different story when I walked down the majestic staircase from the 3rd to the 2nd floor. Can you see him coming down like I see marble? That's my imagination. Marble staircase, and they want him, and he's walking right down there. A huge gathering of people had assembled, mostly officials who had been asked to vacate their offices. I could see very well without my glasses, but I could not see very well without my glasses, but nevertheless, I was able to distinguish a group dominated by shiny spots. These must be the bald heads of the Germans. He's walking down kind of blind, I surmised, and I decided to walk straight up to them. An infinitesimal fraction of silence set in when my French colleagues saw me appear on the staircase. Can't you imagine? But they immediately understood what I was trying to do, and they chatted louder than before in order to create a diversion. I walked up to a group of Germans and recognized my secretary, whom they were still interrogating. I asked her calmly, "What is all this turmoil about?" She answered very composedly, "These gentlemen are looking for Mr. Parazzo." I expressed surprise. "Parazzo? But I saw him a few minutes ago on the 4th floor." And they said, "Quickly upstairs," shouted one of the Germans, and the whole group moved with a big run up the stairs to the 4th floor. I maneuvered casually for a few more minutes in case of being observed by one of the smarter Nazis. My French colleagues were careful not to pay any attention to me, and they returned to their desks. I went to the office of a compatriot, right, from my hometown, and asked him, how could I get out of the building? The main entrance is guarded, but there are maybe a way of getting in the garage through the cellars. The French superintendent downstairs should be able to help you. I walked down to the lobby and talked to the person in charge there, and there was indeed an exit through the cellars, and he led me to it. Midway, he suddenly took fright, thinking of the possible reprisals by the Germans. I persuaded him to help me, and under his guidance, I finally reached the garage, which was full of bicycles. I took a good one. May I ask if you ever repaid for that? Never. And he's going to, well, never mind. We'll forgive him. I took a good, sturdy one and rode to the house of the former French officer who was a member of the underground. There I waited for a few days until the search had abated, and then proceeded to go on where I joined an active marquee in the hills. I learned later that the Germans had been so thorough and convinced of finding me that they had even unrolled old carpets stored in the attics, shades of Cleopatra. They thought he was wound in a carpet. After the war, I met again with my secretary, and she told me that when I walked down the staircase, she was reciting to herself, "Will pass, will not pass, will pass," like, will pass, will not pass, will pass, will not pass, right? I also learned from her that the Gestapo had a picture of me, a detail which I fortunately did not know, for if I had, it is possible that even Dr. Cooey's method would not have helped. And I don't know whether, would you like me to read this, or would you like to talk on that? Or I shall read it?
We can talk about it.
Yeah, ever since and after several other instances when Dr. Cooey's methods saved me from different situations during the war, no one has ever been able to convince me that optimism is not preferable to pessimism. Yeah, hear that one? Truly, my optimism has often been challenged and resented by being contrary to prevailing rules of life. But I have never been given a solid reason to join the other side. The complexity of world affairs demands that those who deal with them be confident and strive to do their utmost, even in the face of the greatest difficulties. The sad chorus of pessimists only makes matters worse. To be a human is to live on the positive and sunny side of what God has given us. Optimism, hard work, and faith are not only in our highest self-interest, but they are the affirmations of life itself. To give up, to see only difficulties and dead ends ahead is not the right attitude towards the great privilege of life, of being born upon this earth in form. I was fortunate that one of my compatriots from the war-torn borderland of Alsace-Lorraine taught me at an early age. It is perhaps in regions which have suffered the most that people acquire extra reasons to hope and a way to cope with the obstacles present in life. Thank you, Dr. Cooey, and thank you from the bottom of my heart, he says. I think that it's a wonderful story, and I'm going to turn it over. You see, I feel at this time we need someone like Mr. Mueller to talk to us, to prepare us, no matter what happens in this world, that we're not going to wither. We're not going to stay in the attic and shiver. Do you understand? Do you understand this, kids? And therefore, it is my greatest of pleasure to introduce you and to turn this over to Mr. Robert Mueller.
Dear Hilda and dear friends, in the first place, when I see this little pamphlet here, which is an antique, I didn't even know that it still existed in some copies. I am reminded that, as a matter of fact, my book writing has your group as its origin. It has because Jyoti or Lucy Carty, who is somewhere behind, was my secretary. And she is for many years a member of your group. And we talked a lot, and she made me tell some stories. And one day she said, well, you should write this story of Dr. Coué. And I wrote it. She typed it. And I think she distributed to a few of you here in the meeting. And then she told me that this was a story which was very well received and that some people found that it was quite helpful. So that in the UN meditation room, they published this little pamphlet and they asked me to tell more stories. And progressively, a number of stories were written. And this finally then became this book, Most of All, They Taught Me Happiness. So it is marvelous for me tonight to see the origin of all this. And as a matter of fact, Lucy or Jyoti did me another great pleasure. It is that one day she came to my office and she had a copy of Dr. Coué's little book, which she was able to get at Samuel Weiser's bookstore. And it was quite something for me to have this book in my hands after having not seen it since 1943. In other words, almost 30 years later, thanks to Jyoti, I had this book again in my hands. And it starts in a very interesting fashion. He says that if you take a board about 3 feet wide or 2 feet wide and 12 feet long, you put it on the ground and you ask anyone to walk on this board, so that everybody will be able to walk and will not fall off the board. But he says, if you put this board between the spires of 2 cathedrals or 2 skyscrapers, most of the people will fall. And yet it's the same board, it's the same measurements, but they are dragged down by the imagination that they are going to fall. And this is something which I had forgotten, but it is something very powerful in terms of suggestion. I've learned quite a lot about this whole affair since then. In particular, when I was talking to some psychiatrists, there was Moshe Feldenkrais, whom some of you might know, who once had luncheon with me at the UN. And I said, look, I know nothing about psychology, psychiatry, and things of this sort. The only thing is that I know Dr. Coué, and it has helped me a lot. And he said, you know, but Dr. Coué has become again very modern because we're writing books about him. And then he told me something very interesting. He said that both Freud and Coué were students of a very famous professor in Paris at the turn of the century, whose name was Charcot. And apparently Charcot discovered that by hypnotizing people, you were able to have people do things which they could never do in a conscious state. So that this is how they discovered the unconscious, and the fact that the unconscious was something very powerful, and that many people were prevented from doing certain things because of the imagination of the conscious. So Freud became very famous because he studied the sicknesses of the mind, the dreams, and he tried to understand this famous subconscious. Whereas Coué became a pharmacist and a healer, and then he came upon the conclusion that you do not need to be hypnotized by others to do that, but that you could self-hypnotize yourself and come to the same effects. And he came to the conclusion that the two best moments of doing this were the early morning when you wake up and the last thing to do before you fall asleep. Now, this is very fascinating because since then it has been discovered that this is what all the monks and all the religions do around the world. They pray when they wake up, because those are very special moments, and this is why they pray at those particular moments of the sunrise and the last moment before they go asleep. Because the monks and the meditators and the old religions, they had instinctively and by experience found that those were two very precious moments. And as Coué explains, he says, why are they precious? Because when you wake up, the conscious is beginning to move on into you, but the subconscious is still the strongest. So that it is at that time that you trigger in the subconscious, and the subconscious is going to help you during the entire day. And if you trigger the subconscious in the evening into a positive thought, or any thought, your subconscious will work during the night and trigger out all kinds of things. I am doing this now systematically. If you ask me that, if the Secretary General asks me to write a speech for him tomorrow, the last thing I will do is before going to bed to think about that speech. And then it works in my mind, and in the morning when I wake up, usually at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, here is the speech. Automatically, I don't even have to think, because it was produced by my subconscious on the basis of all I have learned in my life. So that this is how this man was able to produce very, very interesting healings. And the modern healers are coming back again to Dr. Coué. But there's even more to this. I had a very good friend here in New York, Norman Cousins, who might be known to you through his book on the anatomy of an illness. And we usually had a luncheon every month when he was at a Saturday review, because he wanted to hear from me what the state of the world was, and it was always a very interesting conversation. And usually, there were always two subjects to which he reverted. He always asked me, you know, I'm very, very intrigued about these incidents with the Gestapo, how you escaped from the Gestapo. And I was always intrigued by the fact that he told me that he once healed himself by he had been given up by the doctors by just using laughter. He went to his office and he got any laughing film in New York and he laughed his head off for 2 or 3 days. And then his sedimentation went down. And he then wrote this book on anatomy of an illness. And I saw him recently in San Diego at a conference on holistic health. He has now joined the University of California, the medical school. And he told us something very, very interesting, because I was intrigued. What is it in the human being that can trigger this off? Is it external circumstances? I don't believe so, because it is your own volition. It is, you are the master of your little cosmos, so that you have to give the direction to your being and do not look for outside help. The best help is self-help. Now, what he tells me is that they have discovered at Harvard University, brain researchers have discovered something very fundamental. Apparently, we have many more glands in the brain than anyone ever thought. And they have now come to the conclusion that there are certain glands in the brain that emit liquids and emit electrical signals that go throughout the entire body. So that when you take a positive attitude, you say, look, I feel good, or that's what I'm going to do as a positive response to a certain act. Suppose a car comes close to you, you respond in a certain way. Apparently, there's a whole glandular system in the brain that is going to influence your entire cellular system, brain and body. And if, on the contrary, you take a retracted attitude, you withdraw because you are in fear, then the opposite happens, namely that you have almost like poisons or negative impulses that are conveyed to your entire body and brain. And as a result, then your being functions in a negative way. So that apparently now they can explain scientifically what the difference between the two is. And this is quite an important discovery. And we're going to hear more and more in the years to come about these fundamental effects of the individual influencing himself and putting the glands, the right glands, into operation. Now, my life has been a fascinating one. Now, lived the more, I've come to the conclusion that this is a fundamental law. And it works. It works incredibly. As I was listening to this story, there are many other stories from the war which came back to my mind. You know, people sometimes think that I'm a little bit crazy, you see. I'm optimistic always. I always say, but look, let's try. I think it can be done. I could tell you stories at the UN which are happening almost every day, you see. If something bad happens somewhere, they say, look, call Mueller. He's going to try. Can you do it? I remember when Mr. Waldheim became Secretary General, we discussed this quite a lot because he had known World War II also. And I remember one day, it was during the Vietnam War, I had many very interesting stories to tell, but just this little one, where people came to the United Nations, professors and a few students, and they chained themselves in the Security Council. So the Secretary General had a meeting. Well, the guards want to saw off the chains and evict these people. And he said, look, I do not like violence. There must be a peaceful way of convincing these people to get out of this Security Council. And the chief of the UN police said, impossible. We are old experts. You cannot solve this problem by talk. The only solution is to use a violent means to get them out. And then he said, I don't believe this. Call me Mueller. Okay, so I come to the Secretary General's office and said, look, Mueller, this is what's happening down there in the Security Council. Do you think you can convince these people to leave? I said, sure, why not? Okay, you try. And believe me, almost every morning when I see the UN guards, they never ask me for my pass, you see. They salute me because they all remember this famous instance. So I went down there, and here they were sitting, about 12 people, nicely chained to each other. And I said to the guards, I said, look, just disappear, let me alone with these people. So I sat down with them, and I said, but look, why do you come and chain yourself here in the United Nations? Especially about the Vietnam issue. Because we would be delighted to solve this Vietnam issue, but your own government, United States, doesn't want it to be discussed in the United Nations. So that you have just chained yourself at the wrong place. You should have chained yourself on the other side at the United States mission, you see. We cannot help it. We have been trying for years to bring up Vietnam, and the Vietnamese and the Americans each time are against it. And I told them this, you see. And I always come with Alsace-Lorraine and the things of fighting on two sides and so on, told them the stories of my life and so on. And they were listening very carefully. They were professors, nice, intelligent people. And when I finished, I said, look, I really would beg you that we do not have to use these guards. They want to come up and evict you. I would much prefer if you do this very peacefully. And then I left the room. So the guard said, why do you leave the room? I said, look, it's about 11:30. I'm going to have luncheon now. She said, what? And you're going to leave these people unattended? I said, of course, because if they want to leave, they want to do it in a way that nobody observes them, because they do not want to lose faith. So I do not want to have any guard to go in there, no newspaper man, nothing. Leave these people alone. I said, we're going to have luncheon. That will take an hour and a half. In the meantime, they're going to get hungry. And I said, and sooner or later, one of them will have to go to the bathroom. Right? And then something will happen. And I went to the luncheon. And when I came back to the luncheon, they had gone. And since that time, for every guard in the UN, I'm a hero, you know. The guy who was able to... And they always tell you that it cannot be done. It's a little story, but just to tell you that if you examine the possibility positively, the things are working. I remember another story which came back to my mind when I listened to that one. In order to escape from the German army, you see, there was a fundamental problem. If you left Alsace-Lorraine, your parents were put in prison and deported. And as a matter of fact, my father spent 1 year in prison when I finally crossed the border. So there was always one thing: try to postpone the miseries of your parents as long as you can. So therefore, I used every possible trick on earth to get rid of those German drafts. It's a long story. As a matter of fact, I all wrote them in a little book that will come out someday. But I got, for example, my appendix cut out, so that when the draft arrived, I was in the hospital. So they withdrew it again for 2 months. But one day, and I had been arrested, came out of prison. One day I came home, and my father was there. It was a very somber mien, and he said, "My dear friend, this time you had it. Look what I have for you." And he had a draft in order to go to the German army. And this was on a Thursday, and I was supposed to leave for the German army on Monday. In the meantime, I was trying to work on a new system to cross the border, but for this I needed to get rid of this and to make the final arrangement. And he said, "Yes, I have a few bottles hidden." I said, "Okay, I bet you this bottle that I'm going to get rid of this draft." So he said, "You must be crazy. How are you going to do this?" I said, "I don't know yet, but let me think." And again, it was the whole Coué thing. It would be funny, really, that you get a draft. You're supposed to go to the army on Monday. It would be fantastic if you could get rid of this whole thing. So from the moment I decided that I was going to try how smart I was, I went down to the German commandantur, which was swarming with draftees, and I asked to see the recruiting officer. And I said, "Look, what kind of people are you? I'm going to finish my studies in it was in July. I'm going to finish my studies in October, have my final exams, and here you send me a draft to the German army." He says, "If you are so stupid, why didn't you stay at home? Why did you come to invade us?" It was very arrogant, I thought that you Germans, you were orderly, well administered, and I cannot imagine this whole thing. But the guy didn't fall for this trap. And he said to me, "Look, it is you who is stupid, because you should have informed us that you were having your final exams in October." Because I said, "Look, this war might still last for 2 or 3 years, and then I have to start from scratch. So I want to do my final exams." Of course, I would not have been able to send them any information about my final exams, because I was not having final exams. Not at all. I still would have had to go to school for another 2 years. So I said, and he said to me, "Look, to get this corrected, you have to see the commandant of our place." So I said, "Okay, I want to see him." So I saw this guy. He was a jolly fat gentleman, and he had also studied in Heidelberg. So he asked me about certain professors, certain Bierstuben, and things like this. Was a nice guy. And then he said to me, I told him the story, and he said, "Look, I cannot do anything because you're supposed to leave on Monday." And I said, "Well, I cannot do anything either, because it's Thursday. I will never get a certificate from my university that I'm doing my exams in October." So at one point I said to him, "Perhaps I have an idea." I said, "Suppose I send them a telegram, and I bring you a telegram, and then they confirm later in writing that I have my exams in October. Would you withdraw the draft?" He said, "Well, that's a good idea. Send them a telegram." Okay, I went home. I began to study the timetables. I had to go to Frankfurt. I had to ride to Saarbrücken by bicycle, which was 15 kilometers, leave the bicycle at the railroad station in these rooms where you can keep your things, and went to Heidelberg. Now, there was a trick. So that I established myself a certificate according to which the dean of the faculty of so-and-so was authorizing me to send the cable. The trick was that you cut a potato into two, and then when you had a good fat seal on any official document, you transferred it with the potato. So I went to the post office and I sent to myself a telegram. Dean Walter Thompson, in reply to your telegram, I confirm that you're going to have that you will be having your final exams in October. Heil Hitler, Walter Thoms, you see. And I went back to Frankfurt. My bicycle came home. That was Friday then, in the beginning of the afternoon. And I said to my father, did the cable arrive for me? And he said, no, nothing. Well, at that moment, I didn't feel so proud. I said, after all, it's a war, and why should cables be coming so quickly? But half an hour later, the cable arrived. So I rushed down to the Kommandantur, which was closing at 5 o'clock. I went to see the commandant, and I said, here is my cable, and I have requested in my own cable that they send you a certificate in writing. And the guy took back my draft, and he gave me a pink slip of another 6 months, of 3 or 4 months postponement. And I went home, and I said to my father, where's your bottle of French wine? And we celebrated. And the following week, in the middle of the week, I crossed the French border dressed as a railroad engine man, all black in my face. And when the war was over, I learned that the German officers did not even speak about my escape. What I did, because they were afraid that if the Germans in Berlin would have learned how they could be duped by a young man, they would have all been sent to the Russian front. I just give you this as another example, but there are many, many others. And I do not know why this is, but I just trigger my entire life always, automatically, always on a positive sense. It becomes such a habit that I would be unable to do it otherwise. Of course, it gets on the nerves of certain people because you're not like them. You see, usually you're supposed to be pessimistic, to cry about the fate of the world, and then you are abnormal if you're always positive. But you can have so many, many, many wonderful experiences. To a certain extent, sometimes it even gets spooky, because it is almost as if there was some kind of a spiritual force all around the planet, and that this is always helping you. You know, believe me, I pray a lot. I have my particular sayings, and it almost always works, to the point that you think that they are out there, they are waiting for someone, and then they come and they help you. I have so many examples. Sometimes when my wife travels with me, she sees things happen to me. She says, look, I just don't believe it. How is this happening? I said, but it's happening all the time. She said, but how? How? I could give you so many examples. And my answer is that it all depends on you. You see, one important thing in life is that once you have an ideal, once you have a certain attitude towards life, once you believe in life, then everything that happens, you observe and you grab it. In other words, what is not good for you, what is contrary to your philosophy, you leave it aside. But any person who comes to my office, I immediately see if this person can help an international cause. And I work on them, and they leave my office with a message, and they will work on them. I remember, I think I said to Lucy once, I said, the art in life is not to have priorities. It is to put as many irons in the fire as possible, because then they warm up. Some projects take 5 years, others 10 years, others 2 years. And then sometimes Lucy, or my present secretary, she comes to my office and said, Mr. Mueller, you started this 3 years ago, now it works. Of course it works, but you have to start it. And you have to have always new initiatives, new things. Another very fundamental rule, which I have learned, but this took me a long time, it is that sometimes in your life, you want something very badly. I was candidate 3 times in my life for something which I considered absolutely vital for my future. And all 3 times I was defeated. The first time I was really crushed by the defeat. The third time, my wife couldn't believe it, I was smiling at it. She said, how can you take this? You had such great expectations, and now they appointed someone else into a position which would have normally should have gone to you? I said, because from the beginning, I said I will try my best to get it. But if I don't get it, it is because fate knows better than I. God knows better than I. And if God didn't want me to do this particular thing, it is because he had something else in mind for me. So that, of course, this being the case, I said to my wife, now I have to sit down and I have really to think. Because if fate didn't want me to do that, and probably the outside people who do not want you to succeed, they know you better than yourself. They know what your real destiny should be. So that now I have to draw the conclusions from my defeat and build on it. And when I look back at all these defeats I've had, they were the greatest benedictions that happened to my life. 20 years later, if I wanted to be elected in France to parliament at the age of 27, if I had been elected, maybe I would be a good French politician, but I would have known only France. I would have never known the world and humanity for 34 years as I did today. And yet I thought that this was the thing to do. It was wrong, and destiny was right. And today, they could elect me as president of France. I wouldn't go. Why should I go to such a little country? Why? No reason. So there are so many recipes which I develop, and I live in them from morning to evening, because since they become an habit, they become a second nature. So, for example, I have a rule that I will not let any day pass without making at least one positive proposal. That is an absolute rule. If I would tell you what I've done today, you could write a little book about it. But the first thing I did this morning when I woke up at 5 o'clock is I said, I have to make a proposal. And I wrote down a very major proposal for the Secretary General. He was coming back last night, and tonight he's going to read a proposal which will make a fantastic difference for him in the United Nations. Now, if it doesn't work, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. I will go back to it. I will make other proposals. In other words, to be always on the offensive and in favor of life. And of course, you have to be in favor of your own life. You cannot change other people so easily. And why should you change the world if you do not change yourself? So that the fundamental thing is to work on yourself, not to let negative thoughts into your mind at all. And the strange thing is that when you then become a constantly positive, optimistic, cheerful, resourceful person, then things change around you. The pessimists, they avoid you like the pest. They disappear. The bureaucrats never touch me in the UN. They said, how can you live in this bureaucracy? I say, I've never anything to do with the bureaucrats. Of course, because they avoid me. They say, this guy, you cannot lose any time with them. So I have no problems with the bureaucrats. Because they do not succeed with me, so they avoid you, and this is fine. And then what you also do is that your own optimism is contagious. People do things, the most incredible things. I could tell you a story of something which is just in the making just now. A few years ago, there's a man whom you might know, John McConnell, who has who came up with the fantastic idea of having an Earth Day. And we helped him very much in the United Nations. Uthand liked him very much. And one day he got Margaret Mead to be the president of Earth Day. And one day I walked from the UN to the railroad station, and he came along with me, and he said, Robert, Margaret Mead needs some advice for next Earth Day. So what would you like to do? And I said, well, there are so many ideas, but maybe Margaret Mead, being a famous person, she could write to various Nobel Prize winners, famous people, and say, what do you think we could do in order to have a peaceful world in the future? What would be your proposals? And then he talked to her, and she said, that's a very good idea. Could Mr. Mueller write a letter which I would address to those mobile press? Okay, so I wrote the letter. And then she sent me this letter too in order to answer it. So I answered my own letter. And I made 10 proposals, and the last proposal was that we should look towards the year 2000 and to have a bi-millennium celebration of life. A bi-millennium celebration, right? So this has been circulating around. I'm trying it on people who want to take bold initiatives. And I tried a draft resolution in the General Assembly. Well, I couldn't find a customer for my idea. It was very difficult. But then I had something else which I wanted to do, namely, since I had learned that there were 350 million handicapped people in the world, I wanted to have either a world conference or an international year for the handicapped. It took me almost 10 years until it materialized. And somewhere along the line, I met an American handicapped, a paraplegic, who is in a little wheelchair. And at the luncheon, he said, look, I would like to do something for the United Nations. What could I do? I said, sooner or later, we're going to have a world conference or international year of the disabled. Since you're working in Washington, why don't you position yourself for this? So he went to the Health Education Welfare Department and became in charge of the handicapped. And of course, when the year came, President Reagan appointed him as the president of the U.S. Council. He's Republican. The firms help him quite a lot. And he was so excited by this international year and so fascinated by the UN that when it was all over, he says, I'm not going to stop. I have to do something else. So I'm going to have funds to continue to work for the disabled until the year 2000. I said, brilliant idea. That as a matter of fact, I would like to have a whole bi-millennium celebration in every country around the world. And I gave him a little booklet of a sister, a Catholic sister, which she had written about my idea. And he thought about it. And then a few months ago, he calls me. He said, Robert, I went to Chicago to talk to a man to get some money for my handicapped. And the man is one of those people, you know, like Napoleon Hill. His name is Clement Stone. There's a magazine called Success. And this guy has made millions of dollars, and he believes in positive thinking. He's written books about this. And he went to see Clement Stone to ask him for some money. And Clement Stone said to him, you know, I'm now over 80 years old. I'm rich. But before I die, I would like to do something which is very big. If anyone would come here and give me a big idea, but it has to be a big idea. I don't want to deal with peanuts anymore. If anyone would give me a big idea, I would make a check for $500,000. And then this paraplegic remembered the bi-millennium, and he said, you know, I have an idea. We should create a world foundation for the world's bi-millennium. The guy said, fabulous. And he wrote the check. So Alan Reich called me. He said, Robert, it works. Now what I'm going to do? I said, well, now you have to find a very prestigious person. And I know someone, namely Sadruddin Aga Khan in Geneva, who is a very good heart, a great man, famous name. Why don't you ask him? So he went to Geneva, asked Sadruddin Khan. And the first thing is that Sadruddin Khan came to my office, said, you know, what do you think about this idea of a bi-millennium? So I took a serious face as if I was thinking a lot. I said, you know, it has a good ingredient. We have to think a little bit more about it. Well, in any case, it went on. The statutes are all set, etc., etc. And 2 weeks ago, the Secretary General called me. He said, Robert, I have in my office Mr. Alan Reich, Bradford Morse, the head of the UN Development Program, and a gentleman who's a little funny character, he says, a man called Clement Stone. And these people came to speak to me about the creation of a World Bi-Millennium Foundation. I find it's a very good idea, and it occurred to me that to tell them that I had a colleague, namely Robert Mueller, who would be an ideal man to help you on this. And he said the whole bunch began to laugh. And I've never seen people so exhilarated by my remark. I didn't understand what was happening. So he said, now you're saddled with the World Bi-Millennium. And I can tell you, I said, you better watch your step because you are going to be punished by your own popularity. Well, in any case, they came down, and now we are going to have a World Bimillennium Foundation. And the idea is spreading. Now, it took from the time we discussed it first with Margaret Mead. It must have, I think Lucy was still my secretary. That was in 72. We are now in 80. It's almost 11 years, you see. But after that, we're going to do more because 1985 is the 40th anniversary of the United Nations and is also International Youth Year. So I have proposed to the Secretary General that we're going to make these people of the world by millennium work, give us a positive vision of the future in every field, a positive thinking of what we would like this planet to look like in the year 2000, and not all this pessimism that we're going to be destroyed, etc., etc. We have to get the people into positive thinking for the world. And then in 1985, we're going to have a fat resolution in the General Assembly in which the Secretary General and governments will be asked to put all their heads together in order to have a real celebration of life in the year 2000 and to get rid of as much nonsense we have on this planet as possible. So this is how it works, you see. So that you have, this world is filled with people who are good, people who are willing to do something. And you have to give them a possibility to have an idea which is feasible, something that works. So I do not know, I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a psychologist, I started as an economist, but I just don't know what's wrong with the people not to think in a positive way. It's to be pessimistic. By being pessimistic, you have no chance at all. By being optimistic, maybe it's not going to work. But at least you have a better chance that it is going to work. So what can you do? Now this is, I have carried it to a point where I believe that, you see, the human being is something incredible. The more we learn about it, it is a miraculous functioning, automatic functioning of 30 trillion cells, of vessels, of automatic things. Now, these little cells, your heart, your lung, your liver, your brain, how do you think that they're going to work if you don't give them encouragement? I think if you discourage them, of course they don't work. So that what can a little cell do by itself? Now, so you have in your mind, or you are the boss over this cosmos. Your being is a world, is a fabulous world. You can learn with your eyes, you can see, you can buy for a paperback to get the whole universe described, the galaxies and so on. But if you don't open your eyes, you're not going to see. If you don't want to hear, you're not going to hear. If you do not want to learn, you're not going to learn. So that make your being function. Be passionate about life. Be alive like crazy. The gypsies have the very simple thing. They just say their most important saying is, I love to live. The gypsies love to live. And when we are about to die, then we begin to cry how life could have been beautiful, nobody wants to die. But why don't we live while we live? It is very simple. And then, of course, when you have negative things, keep them away. Why should I read the New York Times in the morning? Why? Sometimes at the railroad station, I heard not long ago one of these tall Irish Americans say to another tall Irish American, John, you look so happy today. What happened to you? He says, I haven't read the New York Times. It's about as simple. Now, of course, there is a little bit of hypocrisy in this. But why should I read newspapers that have almost never anything good to report? They are as bad today as they were at the time of Vietnam. And if tomorrow if you had a peaceful world with no war on this planet, and I remember there was 2 years ago a period that there was no active conflict, you see, and the newspapers always look as terrible. So there is something wrong with this. So keep pessimists away from yourself. Just close your eyes. Open it on anything that is good. Interrogate yourself. You know, one of the most beautiful things, if one of the great experiences in life is to be in prison. And I've discovered that many people have been changed by prison. I think St. Francis was a playboy until he was in prison. Sadat in Egypt was transformed into a spiritual person because in prison, you have nothing to hope for. So you have just a cell and you have ugly sights and things of this sort. So you are left with yourself. And this is a very, very important experience because when you are left with yourself, with no hope, then you have to dialogue with yourself. And then you discover that even if the whole planet was lousy, your own life is something fabulous. That you dialogue with yourself, you wake up in the morning, you observe your thoughts. You look, why do you have to be rich? Just look at the flower, look at the bird, look at the moon, look at the stars, and look at the sun. Costs nothing. Costs absolutely nothing. Walk in nature. Costs nothing. And yet you have the whole beautiful creation all around you without having to pay for it. So you have to observe yourself, you have to live with yourself, and you have always, from morning to evening, every minute of your life, to be geared to life. You really want to have to live. And all these ideas of getting old, of dying and so on, just put it out of your mind. Put it out of your mind. For me, for example, I see now UN officials leaving the UN retiring. It's a drama for them. I said, but why do you take your life as descending? For me, life is going to ascend until I die, and even after that, it is going to go on. Okay? Because you see, even when you get older, as I do now I find a new wealth. It is that now I can conclude from my life. I can tell you these stories. I can give you some wisdom from my life. I know so much that now I'm fascinated by what I have learned. And this is why I'm writing, you see. I'm giving it to others. And I know that when I die, I will not die. Because what I have done in my life will remain. My thoughts will remain. My writings will remain. And I've even sworn something else. I will do like my preferred saint, which is little Saint Thérèse de Lisieux, a French. You see, in Saint Cathedral, she's there, and she helps me every time, absolutely every time, because she made a fantastic promise, and I hold her to that promise. She says, "Je passerai mon ciel à faire du bien sur la terre." That's what is written in Saint Patrick, and it says, "I will spend my heaven to do good on earth," and she does it. And when I die, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to join up with her. I'm going to team up with her, you see. And I can visualize myself as a spirit, you know, floating around this planet and seeing if my help is done. So I have a whole job ahead of me, you see. Now you might say he's crazy. Why not? I think very often people say, but you have illusions. I say to my wife, I said, but illusions are absolutely essential. As a matter of fact, all human life is illusion because we do not have an answer to the mysteries of this planet and the universe. So we need illusions. We need faith. We need light. As the Christ said, you know, we think that the whole universe is light. Not true. The sky is not true. You know, when you take an airplane Concorde that goes in outer thing, they close the windows because they don't want you to see that as you go out of this atmosphere, everything is pitch black. So it is our little planet only that is blue. So we are on a planet that has life, that has light, so that you have to develop a complete philosophy. I think that you can never be allowed to be negative. Never be allowed to be on the side of bad, to be on the side of killing, to be on the side of violence, to be on the side of hurting others. If I'm a miracle, as I think that I am, how can I hurt another miracle? I have to respect every other human being as a miracle. This is why I'm proclaiming everywhere, even if the military and others hate me, I proclaim a fundamental human right which has not been proclaimed so far, namely the right not to kill and not to be killed. Well, I'm sorry I could go on like this for hours and hours, and it is getting late.
Not very late.
But again, I do not know how I came to this, but over the years in my life, there's something else which I would also like to tell you, which is important. It is the fact that you all have in your life a specific predisposition. It's something very fascinating how nature or God or whatever is putting in people very different capacities. Some are more physical, others more mental, others more spiritual. There's a tremendous variety. And it is important for every human being to find his fundamental dispositions and to remain faithful to them. Now, I was not faithful to them because society forced me to change. And I've lost practically 20 years from the age when the war was over to the age of 40 because I always believed the values which were proposed to me by others. I wanted to be promoted. I wanted to have doctorate degrees. I wanted to be published in the American Economic Review. My God, what an ideal to have one. You have to work for 20 years to get one article published in the American Economic Review, and the rest of the world doesn't even know that you published it, you see. But these are the ideals which are being given in university, and you forget to live. And it was at the age of 40, that's another thing which is important for all of you. It is that there will come a point in your life, and then you will discover that society has fooled you. And then very often you have a change. You go back to your fundamental values. And I remember I was in Cyprus with the UN troops. Was away from my family. It was a dangerous situation. And I had a lot of time to think. And I was 40 years old. And I said to myself, look, you have read hundreds and hundreds of books. You have tried everything. You have listened to hundreds of professors, all kinds of things, and you're not smarter than you were before. So why should I go on reading and trying other things? Because if you haven't learned by the age of 40, it's hopeless. You'll never learn. It means that there's no book that gives you the truth. So I stopped at the time reading. And since then, I read very, very few books. And it was really a mental hygiene, because then I discovered that by not listening to others, I was rediscovering myself. So, and I was rediscovering my dreams and my natural propensities, which I had as a young man. So I went back to them. I went back to my ideals. I began to dialogue with myself. I began to keep a diary. A diary is absolutely fundamental in your life. I would really advise every one of you to have always, as I have, pieces of paper in my pocket. And if I have an idea, I will write it down. Sometimes they're very stupid ideas. But it doesn't matter. I think I have one here, which is rather strange. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to read it. It was a thought which I had when I saw a very beautiful girl. Well, and I was thanking her mentally. I was thanking God for making beautiful girls. Well, by doing this, you find yourself, and you can live so beautifully. You know, something happened to me 3 days ago. I just grabbed out of my thousands of pages of diary, which are almost non-legible because I write very badly. But I just took one of these envelopes. It was 1965, and I read them in the train. And then I said, but my God, this was my visit to Budapest in 1965. And I was reading these things. I had forgotten almost everything. But by reading it, it came back. It was beautiful. not beautiful in writing because I will have to work on it if I ever want to put it in final form. But it was the feelings. It was the sunrise over Budapest which was there. It was things which I do not remember, but there was such a poetry. I left the hotel early in the morning just to see the Donau and to see the city, the citadel, wake up. And I said, but my God, how beautiful. I'm living this all again because I wrote it down. So that what I discover now is that all I have to do is to take a few pages of my journal, and I live twice. I live twice. I can read a whole year of my life in Geneva, for example. I can read it in about 3 hours. Now, can you imagine living again an entire year of your life in 3 hours? The children come back. A field of flowers, a glacier in the Alps. It's all there. If I had not retained it, it would not be there. So that you can live, you have to be greedy about life, as Margaret Mead said. You have to organize yourself. And for this, it doesn't matter. You can do it in prison. When I was in prison, I decided to be the happiest man on earth. And I was able to do it. And I escaped from the scare and from all the anxieties, and I discovered that every prisoner was doing exactly the same thing. They were all out of the prison with their mind. So that we can do the same thing. The world is a kind of prison. You're always prisoner of something, of your nation, of your bosses, of your institution. But you can escape from this prison. You can be a free person by working with yourself. You are the greatest capital. How your mind works, what you can see, what you can feel, what you can hear, what you give to others. And you started with this song, Love. That's the whole thing. Love, as Dante said, is what holds the universe together. What is love? It is this positive attitude. If you hate, you close. If you love, you open. And humans are capable of an incredible amount of love. So you can love creation, you can love God, you can love the planet, you can love your neighbor, you can love your wife, you can love your children, you can love your life. And this is the secret of life. And even if everybody says, but he's a fool, you see, you'll never be famous, you're not in the newspapers, who cares? What you need to be in newspapers in order to be happy? As a matter of fact, I discovered that as you become a little bit more famous, it is getting absolutely disastrous. I'm beginning to be a little bit known now. When I look at my mail every day, I'm getting frightened. How can I answer all these letters? And you have people who are really punished then by their own fame. So they do not think that famous people are such happy people. As a matter of fact, many of them finish very badly because they cannot take it. They cannot take the demands that are placed on them all the time. Well, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot about hundreds of little things. There is no real philosophy in it. But there is, I think it's in you. It's in you. And you see, if we are born, if we have been given life in the universe, it's in order to live. It is not to kill ourselves. The universe has something in mind for us. This is what I'm proclaiming in the United Nations. Humanity, humans, are a tremendously special species. We want to know. This is why we have looked at the stars. We look into the atom. We have investigated this whole planet. You know, the human species is something very probably unique in the universe. Humans are the universe becoming conscious of itself. And this is why it is not only our knowledge of the universe, but it is also our heart and spirit that has to encompass the universe. And this is why I'm proclaiming the arrival of a spiritual age. Because we must transcend ourselves above the matter of this planet. We have to be part of the universe. The universe is not out there and we are here. We are in the middle of it. We are a drop of the cosmos, and a very special one, because on this one there is life. And we, as the most intelligent species, we have a cosmic destiny and destination. We have to believe in this. And from the moment all people on this planet and governments will understand that we're not here for power, for glory, but that we are here because there is a destiny in the stars for us, that there is a cosmic destiny. From that moment on, everything will fall into place. And these cosmic laws, you find them in all the religions. These cosmic laws are said by people like Hilda, all the healers, all the gurus. Why do you listen to them and say that they are so profound? Because they give you the divine or cosmic laws. And from the moment the politicians and the people in the United Nations will discover them, then we will behave rightly. And it's happening more and more. Hammarskjöld, who became a mystic, Utant, who was a spiritual person, and the present Secretary General again was very profoundly spiritual and philosophical, and even a poet. So it's happening, and all I would ask you is that contribute your happiness, contribute your love, contribute your understanding, your compassion, your kindness, contribute all this to humanity. And if all the 4.5 billion people on this planet contribute their love, their happiness, their kindness, and their non-violence to humanity, then we will have a loving, non-violent, and happy humanity. It is all starting with us. And then someday governments will no longer be able to have these ugly arms, to have all these injustices, because they will be surrounded by people who will no longer believe them. And from that moment on, they will no longer be able to do it. That is my most important advice. Do not think that you have no power. There's a tremendous power in 4.5 billion people. So let us exercise this power, and then we will be able to change the world. I thank you very much.